Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of this emotional story. She stood at the edge of the room, her fingers clenched tightly around the delicate fabric of her ivory dress. The wedding hall was filled with soft lights, quiet whispers, and the weight of expectations she had never asked for. Ayesha had always believed that marriage should begin with choice, with love, or at least with understanding. But tonight, she was becoming a wife against someone else's will, and against her own dreams. Across the room, Ethan Blackwood looked like a man attending his own sentencing rather than his wedding. His posture was stiff, his jaw clenched, his dark eyes empty of warmth. He hadn't wanted this marriage. Not to her, not to anyone. Yet here he was, standing beneath crystal chandeliers, bound by a contract his powerful family had written long before Ayesha ever entered his life. This wasn't a love story. At least, not yet. Ethan's grandfather, the ruthless patriarch of the Blackwood Empire, had made it clear, marry the girl or lose everything. The company, the inheritance, the legacy Ethan had spent his entire life building. And Ayesha, quiet, graceful, and completely unaware of the storm she was walking into, was the price he had to pay. When their eyes met for the first time that evening, there was no spark. Only tension. Ayesha lowered her gaze quickly. She had learned early in life that silence was safer than questions. Her father had agreed to this marriage out of desperation, believing it would secure her future. He didn't know Ethan's heart was already sealed shut. The vows were spoken like rehearsed lines in a play neither of them believed in. Ethan's voice was cold and distant as he repeated the words, while Ayesha's trembled just enough to reveal her fear. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the applause felt hollow, like rain falling on stone. The reception passed in a blur. Smiles for the cameras, polite nods, strangers congratulating them on a union built on lies and obligation. Ethan barely looked at her, and Ayesha kept her hands folded, her mind racing with questions she was too afraid to ask. When the night finally ended, they were driven to the Blackwood estate, a massive mansion perched on a hill, isolated and imposing. The silence in the car was suffocating. The city lights faded behind them, replaced by darkness and the sound of tires on gravel. "This marriage changes nothing," Ethan said suddenly, his voice sharp, cutting through the quiet. Ayesha's heart skipped. She turned slightly toward him, but he kept his eyes on the road ahead. "We'll live separate lives," he continued. "You'll have everything you need. But don't expect anything else." She swallowed hard. "I understand." It wasn't a lie. She truly did understand. She hadn't expected love. But hearing it spoken so plainly still hurt more than she had imagined. At the mansion, staff members greeted them with practiced professionalism. Ayesha felt like an outsider stepping into someone else's world. Everything was polished, expensive, and cold. Just like Ethan. Their bedroom was enormous, too large for two people who felt like strangers. A king-sized bed sat in the center, untouched, waiting. The air felt heavy, charged with unspoken tension. Ethan loosened his tie and walked toward the window. "You can take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep on the couch." Ayesha nodded, unsure of what to say. She watched him for a moment, noticing the exhaustion in his shoulders, the weight he carried beneath his anger. For the first time, she wondered if he was as trapped as she was. As she sat on the edge of the bed, carefully removing her jewelry, a wave of loneliness washed over her. This was her wedding night. Yet she had never felt more alone. Minutes passed in silence. Ethan stood still, staring out into the darkness. Then, without turning around, he spoke again. "Why did you agree to this?" The question startled her. She hesitated, then answered honestly. "I didn't think I had a choice." He let out a bitter laugh. "Neither did I." Their eyes met in the reflection of the glass. Something shifted, just slightly. A crack in the wall between them. Ayesha gathered her courage. "I know you didn't want this. I won't make it harder for you." Ethan turned, studying her face as if seeing her clearly for the first time. She wasn't what he had expected. There was no greed in her eyes. No ambition. Just quiet strength and sadness. "Good," he said finally. "That's for the best." He walked toward the couch, but before he lay down, a sharp sound cut through the room. Ayesha gasped, clutching her side as pain rippled through her body. Ethan froze. "What's wrong?" I'm fine, she said quickly, though her face had gone pale. He stepped closer, concern flickering despite himself. You don't look fine. She hesitated, then shook her head. Please, just, give me a moment. Reluctantly, he stepped back. But something about her reaction unsettled him. This wasn't just nervousness. This was fear, and pain. As Ayesha lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, she whispered a silent prayer. Tonight wasn't just the beginning of a marriage, it was the beginning of a secret she had carried alone for far too long. And before dawn, that secret would change everything. Morning arrived quietly at the Blackwood estate, but nothing about Ayesha's heart felt calm. Sunlight slipped through the tall windows, touching the edges of the room that still felt unfamiliar, almost unreal. She lay awake long before dawn, her body tense, her mind replaying the events of the night over and over again. The pain she had felt hadn't fully disappeared, it lingered like a warning she could never ignore. She carefully shifted, wincing slightly, reminding herself to stay composed. No one here needed to know the truth. Not yet. On the couch near the window, Ethan stirred. He hadn't slept much either. The image of Ayesha clutching her side, her face drained of color, refused to leave his thoughts. He told himself it wasn't his concern. This marriage was nothing more than a formality, a transaction forced upon them both. And yet, when he opened his eyes and saw her still lying there, fragile and quiet, a strange sense of responsibility tightened in his chest. He stood up, running a hand through his hair. It's morning, he said, his voice controlled but softer than the night before. Ayesha nodded and slowly sat up. I'll be out of your way, she replied, forcing steadiness into her tone. That's not what I meant, Ethan said, surprising himself. The staff will expect us downstairs. Breakfast. She hesitated, then agreed. As she stood, her balance faltered for a split second. Ethan noticed. He stepped forward instinctively, steadying her by the arm. The contact was brief, but it sent an unexpected jolt through both of them. I'm fine, she said quickly, pulling her arm back. Ethan frowned but didn't push. If you're sick, you should say something. I'm not sick, she replied. Not exactly a lie, not exactly the truth either. Downstairs, the long dining table was already set, silverware gleaming, servants moving quietly. The atmosphere felt formal, almost cold. Ayesha sat at one end, Ethan at the other, a distance that mirrored the emotional gap between them. Every movement felt watched, every silence heavy. As they ate, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. A message from his grandfather. A reminder of the rules. Of expectations. Of control. After breakfast, I have meetings, he said abruptly. You can explore the house or do whatever you like. Just, don't leave the property without telling someone. Ayesha looked up. Am I a prisoner here? The question caught him off guard. He met her gaze, truly met it this time, and saw not defiance, but quiet dignity. No, he said firmly. You're not. The words hung between them, fragile but sincere. Later that day, Ayesha wandered through the estate's garden. The fresh air helped, but the pain returned in waves, forcing her to sit on a stone bench beneath an old oak tree. She pressed her hand against her side, breathing slowly, reminding herself why she had agreed to this marriage in the first place. This union wasn't just about survival, it was about protection. About keeping a promise she had made long ago. Inside the house, Ethan tried to focus on work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her. Against his better judgment, he found himself asking a housekeeper if she had eaten properly, if she needed anything. The concern irritated him. He didn't want attachments. Attachments led to weakness. By evening, the tension between them had shifted into something quieter, more complicated. They shared dinner again, this time with fewer words, but also less hostility. Ayesha thanked the staff politely, her manners natural and sincere. Ethan noticed how easily she fit into the space without trying to claim it. That night, as they prepared for bed in separate parts of the room, Ethan finally spoke. About last night, you don't owe me explanations. But if something's wrong, you should tell someone. Ayesha's hands trembled slightly as she folded her scarf. Some truths are dangerous, she said softly. Once spoken, they can't be taken back. Ethan studied her. You think I'd use it against you? I don't know you well enough to answer that, she said honestly. The silence that followed wasn't hostile, it was thoughtful. Later, as the house settled into sleep, Ayesha felt the familiar sharp pain return, stronger this time. She bit down on her lip to keep from crying out, but a soft sound escaped anyway. Ethan heard it. He sat up immediately, his instincts overriding his resolve. He crossed the room. Ayesha. She turned her face away. Please, don't. But he was already there, kneeling beside the bed. This isn't normal. You're hurting. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a trembling breath, she whispered, if I tell you, you can't tell anyone. Not your family. Not anyone. Ethan nodded slowly. I promise. She closed her eyes, tears slipping free. I didn't agree to this marriage because I wanted to be your wife, she said. I agreed because someone wanted me silenced. Because being here, under your name, was the only way to stay safe. Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. Safe from who? She opened her eyes and looked at him, fear raw and real. From the truth about me. And what I'm carrying. His heart pounded. What do you mean? Ayesha took a shaky breath. I'm not just your unwanted bride, Ethan. I'm the keeper of a secret powerful enough to destroy lives, including yours. The words settled between them, heavy and irreversible. Ethan straightened slowly, realization dawning. This marriage wasn't just forced. It was dangerous. And from this moment on, nothing about their lives would ever be simple again. Ethan didn't move for a long time after Ayesha's confession. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves were listening. He had built his life on control, of business deals, of emotions, of outcomes, but in that moment, control slipped through his fingers. A woman he barely knew, a wife he never wanted, had just placed a secret in his hands that carried the weight of destruction. He looked at her again, really looked, and for the first time saw not a stranger, but a storm held together by sheer will. What are you carrying? He asked quietly, careful not to let his voice betray the surge of thoughts racing through his mind. Ayesha hesitated, then slowly sat up, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. Before I answer that, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes, you need to understand something. Once I tell you, you're involved. There's no stepping away. Ethan gave a short, humorless laugh. I think that line was crossed the moment your safety became my responsibility. She searched his face, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. Finally, she nodded. I worked for a research firm overseas, she began. It looked ordinary on the surface. Environmental data, energy solutions. But I discovered something I wasn't supposed to. Proof that a powerful corporation has been illegally dumping toxic waste, and covering it up with falsified reports. Ethan's expression darkened. And that corporation is connected to my family. It wasn't a question. Ayesha's silence confirmed it. They were going to make me disappear, she whispered. An accident. A scandal. Something clean. My father was approached. The marriage proposal came soon after. Your grandfather didn't know the real reason, but the people behind it did. They thought hiding me inside your family would keep me quiet. Ethan stood and walked to the window, his fists clenched. The Blackwood Empire had enemies, but this was rot from the inside. You should have gone to the authorities. I tried, she said. The evidence vanished. The people I spoke to stopped answering calls. I realized how deep it went. He turned back to her. So you married me to survive. Yes, she said simply. And to protect what I know. A long silence followed. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, indifferent to the shift happening inside the room. Ethan exhaled slowly. My grandfather values power above all else. If he finds out, he'll see you as a liability. I know, Ayesha said. That's why I kept quiet. Ethan nodded, his mind already calculating possibilities. Then we do this my way, he said. No more secrets between us. If someone is threatening you, they're threatening my name. And that makes it my problem. Her eyes widened slightly. Why would you help me? He paused. The answer surprised even him. Because I won't let anyone use my wife as leverage. The word wife hung in the air, heavier than before. The days that followed marked a subtle change in their relationship. They still kept their distance, but the hostility had faded. Ethan arranged additional security under the guise of protecting the estate. He cancelled unnecessary public appearances. Ayesha noticed everything, though she said nothing. For the first time since the wedding, she slept without waking in fear. One afternoon, Ethan invited her into his private study. The room was lined with books and screens, the heart of his operations. "I want you to show me exactly what you found," he said. She hesitated. "If I bring this out, I'll handle the consequences," he replied. She took a deep breath and connected a small encrypted drive she had hidden in her luggage. Data filled the screen: reports, images, timestamps. Ethan's jaw tightened as he scrolled. Names he recognized. Partners. Allies. People he had trusted. "This could destroy reputations," he said. "It could save lives," Ayesha replied. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, a shared purpose. That evening, as they sat across from each other at dinner, Ethan spoke again. "We'll present a united front," he said. "To the world, this marriage is solid. No cracks." "And privately?" she asked. "Privately, we prepare." For the first time, Ayesha smiled faintly. Not out of happiness, but relief. Later that night, Ethan received a message from an unknown number. One sentence. A threat. He deleted it without showing her, but the warning was clear. They were being watched. Days turned into a week. Rumors began to surface. Subtle ones. Whispers in business circles. Someone was probing, testing boundaries. Ethan felt the pressure mounting, but he also felt something else growing: respect. Ayesha was calm, intelligent, and brave in ways he hadn't expected. She never demanded reassurance, never asked for affection. Yet her presence had begun to matter. One evening, as a storm raged outside, the power flickered. The house fell into darkness for a brief moment. Ayesha gasped softly. Without thinking, Ethan reached for her hand. She froze, then slowly relaxed, her fingers curling around his. Neither of them spoke. When the lights returned, they let go, but the connection lingered. That night, Ethan lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling. He realized something that unsettled him more than any threat: he no longer saw Ayesha as an obligation. She was a responsibility he had chosen. And that choice was about to be tested. Because the next morning, a black car pulled up outside the estate, unannounced. And Ethan knew, before anyone spoke, that the people hunting Ayesha had finally made their move. The black car waited at the gates like a silent threat, its tinted windows revealing nothing, its presence speaking volumes. Ethan stood at the tall window in the main hall, his expression unreadable as he watched the security team approach the vehicle. Ayesha stood a few steps behind him, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment the danger she had tried so hard to outrun finally caught up with her. "They didn't announce themselves," Ethan said calmly. "That already tells me enough. Whoever they are, they won't leave empty-handed," Ayesha replied, her voice low but steady. Fear lived inside her, but panic no longer controlled her. Not now. Not after everything she had already survived. Ethan turned to face her. "You stay here. No matter what happens, you don't come downstairs unless I say so." She nodded, though every instinct screamed at her to follow him. "Be careful." He paused at the door, surprised by the concern in her voice. "I will." From the upper landing, Ayesha watched as Ethan descended the stairs, his posture confident, every step measured. He looked like the powerful heir everyone feared, not the man who had sat beside her nights earlier, listening to her truth in silence. The front doors opened, and two men stepped inside, both dressed in expensive suits, their smiles polite but cold. "Mr. Blackwood," one of them said. "We apologize for the unannounced visit." "I don't," Ethan replied flatly. "State your business." The man chuckled softly. "Straight to the point. We respect that. We're here regarding a misunderstanding involving your wife." Ayesha's breath caught. "There is no misunderstanding," Ethan said. "And my wife is not available." The second man stepped forward. "She possesses information that doesn't belong to her. Information that could cause unnecessary damage." Ethan's eyes hardened. "Damage to whom?" The men exchanged a glance. "To many people, including your family." Silence fell, thick and dangerous. "You should leave," Ethan said. "Before this conversation becomes public." The first man smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. This is your only warning, Mr. Blackwood. Protecting her will cost you more than you realize. Ethan leaned in slightly, his voice low and deadly. Threatening my wife is the fastest way to ensure you lose everything you came here to protect. For a moment, it seemed as if the men might push further. Then, slowly, they stepped back. You've made your position clear, one of them said. We'll be in touch. When the doors finally closed behind them, Ethan stood still, listening to the echo fade. Only then did he release the breath he'd been holding. Upstairs, Ayesha felt her knees weaken. She retreated into the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. The danger was no longer abstract. It had a face now. A voice. A promise of consequences. Minutes later, Ethan entered the room. His gaze immediately found her. They're gone. She looked up. For now. He nodded. For now. She stood slowly. I'm sorry, she said, the words heavy with guilt. I never meant to drag you into this. Ethan frowned. You didn't drag me. They did. And I don't back down from threats. She studied him, searching for doubt, regret, anything. She found none. That means things will escalate, she said quietly. I know, he replied. Which is why we need to change our approach. That evening, Ethan made several calls, activating resources he had never used for personal matters before. Legal teams, cyber experts, trusted allies. Ayesha watched from a distance, realizing the scale of the power surrounding him. For the first time, she believed she might not be alone in this fight after all. As the night deepened, exhaustion settled over both of them. They sat across from each other in the dimly lit living area, the tension between them different now, less sharp, more intimate. You could still walk away, Ayesha said suddenly. Annul the marriage. Say I deceived you. Ethan looked at her steadily. And let them hunt you without protection. No, this isn't your responsibility. He leaned back, crossing his arms. It became my responsibility the moment I chose to stand in front of you today. Her throat tightened. Why? He hesitated, then spoke the truth. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being a stranger. The confession lingered between them. That night, Ayesha couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, staring out at the dark grounds below. The estate felt less like a prison now, but more like a fortress under siege. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Ethan, holding 2 cups of tea. You should rest, he said, handing her one. She accepted it, their fingers brushing lightly. Do you ever regret agreeing to this marriage? She asked. He considered the question. I regret the reasons behind it. Not this. Her heart skipped. Days passed, and the pressure intensified. Anonymous messages. Suspicious activity online. Ethan's enemies were circling, testing defenses. Yet through it all, Ayesha remained calm, focused, helping where she could, analyzing data, offering insights. Ethan began to rely on her judgment more than he expected. One evening, while reviewing documents together, their hands brushed again. This time, neither pulled away. The silence was charged, filled with emotions neither had named. This is dangerous, Ayesha whispered. So is everything worth protecting, Ethan replied. They stepped back, the moment unfinished but unforgettable. Later that night, as rain hammered against the windows, Ethan received confirmation of his worst fear: someone inside his family was leaking information. The threat wasn't just external, it was personal. He looked toward the bedroom where Ayesha slept and made a decision that would change everything. From this point forward, he would no longer just protect her. He would fight for her. And the war they were stepping into would test not only their courage, but their hearts. The realization that the danger came from inside his own family hit Ethan harder than any external threat ever could. He stood alone in his study long after midnight, staring at the list of names on his screen, people bound to him by blood, loyalty, or shared ambition. Somewhere among them was a traitor, someone willing to sacrifice Ayesha to protect their own interests. The thought made his chest tighten with a rage he had never felt so personally before. By morning, Ethan had already set his plan in motion. He ordered a discreet internal audit of all communications, masking it as a routine security upgrade. No one questioned him. They never did. Ayesha noticed the shift in his energy immediately, more focused, more guarded, but also more determined. You found something, she said quietly as they sat together in the breakfast room. I found confirmation, Ethan replied. Not proof yet, but enough to know we're closer to the truth than they're comfortable with. Her fingers curled around her teacup. That makes us more dangerous. It makes them desperate, he corrected. As the day unfolded, Ayesha felt the walls closing in again, not from fear, but from the weight of being the reason for this war. She wandered through the garden later, the cool air grounding her thoughts. She had spent so long running, hiding, surviving. Now, for the first time, someone else was standing in front of the storm for her. Ethan found her there, standing beneath the oak tree where she had once sat in pain. You shouldn't be alone outside, he said. She turned to him. I needed to breathe. He nodded, then hesitated. I should tell you something. Her heart skipped. What is it? There's a leak, he said plainly. Someone close. Very close. Ayesha absorbed the words without surprise. I expected that. He studied her face. You're not afraid. I've lived with fear for too long, she said. At some point, it loses its power. Something in her calm steadiness settled him. I'm moving you to a safer wing of the house, he said. More secure. Fewer staff. And you? She asked. I'll be nearby. That night, as the estate grew quieter, the tension between them deepened. The new rooms were closer together, separated only by a shared sitting area. It felt deliberate, intimate in a way neither mentioned. Later, a storm rolled in, thunder echoing across the hills. The power flickered again, plunging the wing into near darkness. Ayesha froze, memories rushing back, of nights spent hiding, of doors breaking open, of running. Before she could stop herself, she stepped into the sitting area. Ethan was already there. You okay? He asked, his voice low. She nodded, though her hands betrayed her. I don't like the dark. Without thinking, he reached out, placing a reassuring hand over hers. You're safe. The words, spoken with such certainty, cracked something open inside her. She looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw not just power, but protection. Not obligation, but choice. The lights came back on moments later, but neither moved. This isn't supposed to be like this, Ayesha whispered. I know, Ethan said. But it is. He didn't deny it. The following days brought a breakthrough. Ethan's team traced a pattern of encrypted messages linked to one of his cousins, a man deeply involved in the energy sector connected to the scandal Ayesha had uncovered. The betrayal cut deep. Family dinners, shared holidays, all tainted now. Ethan confronted him privately. The conversation was short, cold, and devastating. The cousin denied nothing, only warned Ethan that exposing the truth would destroy the family legacy. Then it deserves to fall, Ethan replied. When Ethan told Ayesha what he had discovered, she felt a mix of guilt and vindication. I never wanted to ruin anyone, she said. You didn't, Ethan said firmly. They ruined themselves. That night, they sat together, reviewing the final pieces of evidence needed to go public. The closer they got, the higher the stakes became. Ayesha's hand trembled as she scrolled through the files. What if this doesn't end well? She asked. Ethan placed his hand over hers, steadying it. Then we face it together. Together. The word echoed in her mind. As the hour grew late, exhaustion overtook her. She leaned back, closing her eyes. Ethan watched her, noticing the dark circles beneath her eyes, the quiet strength that never wavered. He realized, with startling clarity, that he cared for her far more than he was willing to admit. When she stirred, she found herself resting against his shoulder. She tensed, then slowly relaxed when he didn't pull away. I'm sorry, she murmured. Don't be, he said softly. For a moment, the world narrowed to the quiet rhythm of shared breath. The peace didn't last. Ethan's phone buzzed sharply. He checked the message, his expression hardening. What is it? Ayesha asked. They know we're close, he said. And they're making their next move. Before she could respond, a distant alarm echoed through the estate. Security alerts. Red lights flashing. Ethan stood instantly, his protective instincts flaring. Stay here, he ordered. She grabbed his arm. No, not again. I won't hide while you fight alone. He looked at her, torn between fear and pride. Then stay behind me. They stepped into the corridor together as footsteps echoed nearby. The game had changed. The enemy was no longer whispering from the shadows, they were forcing a confrontation. And as Ethan and Ayesha stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. One truth became impossible to ignore. This marriage, born of coercion and secrets, had turned into an unbreakable alliance. And possibly, something far more dangerous. The alarm echoed through the halls like a heartbeat out of control, red lights flashing against the polished walls of the Blackwood estate. Security personnel moved quickly, voices low but urgent, while Ethan stood firmly in front of Ayesha, his body instinctively shielding her from whatever threat was unfolding. For the first time since the wedding, fear wasn't just something they spoke about in quiet conversations, it was real, immediate, and closing in. System breach, one of the guards reported. External access attempt. They're trying to pull files from the private servers. Ethan's jaw tightened. Lock down the network. No data leaves this house. As the guard nodded and rushed off, Ayesha's mind raced. They're after the evidence, she said. If they destroy it, everything we've risked becomes meaningless. They won't, Ethan replied. Not tonight. They moved swiftly toward the secure control room, footsteps echoing down the corridor. The estate, once a symbol of untouchable luxury, now felt like a battlefield. Screens flickered as technicians worked furiously to block the intrusion. Lines of code scrolled across the monitors, each second stretching into eternity. They're good, one technician muttered. Very good. Ayesha stepped forward despite Ethan's instinctive protest. They're routing through a mirrored server, she said. Cut the secondary access point and isolate the primary. The technician stared at her, then followed her instructions. Within moments, the attempted breach stalled. It worked, he said, astonished. Ethan looked at Ayesha with new respect. You just saved everything. She exhaled shakily. I just delayed them. The attack ended as suddenly as it began, leaving behind a tense silence. Everyone waited for the next move, but none came. For now. Later, as calm slowly returned, Ethan escorted Ayesha back. To the secure wing. The adrenaline faded, replaced by exhaustion and an unspoken realization, they had crossed a line together. There was no turning back now. They're going to escalate, Ayesha said quietly as they sat in the dim sitting area. They won't stop until they either silence me or discredit everything. Ethan nodded. Then we change the timeline. She looked at him. What do you mean? We go public, he said. Not later. Soon. Her breath caught. That will make us targets. We already are, he replied. This way, they lose control of the narrative. Silence stretched between them as the weight of his words settled in. Ayesha had imagined this moment countless times, yet now that it was close, fear clawed at her resolve. I trust you, she said finally. But once we do this, there's no hiding. Ethan met her gaze. I'm not asking you to hide anymore. That night, sleep came in fragments. Every sound felt amplified, every shadow suspicious. At some point, Ayesha woke to find Ethan sitting nearby, watching the door, refusing to rest. You should sleep, she whispered. So should you, he replied. She hesitated, then spoke the thought that had been growing in her chest. Why are you really doing this, Ethan? He didn't answer right away. At first, it was obligation, he admitted. Then it became anger. Now, he trailed off. Now, she prompted softly. Now it's personal, he said. Because I care what happens to you. Her heart skipped. The honesty in his voice left no room for doubt. That makes this harder, she said. It makes it worth it, he countered. The following morning, Ethan's grandfather summoned him for a private meeting. The old man sat behind his massive desk, his expression sharp, his eyes calculating. You've caused quite a disturbance, his grandfather said. Security upgrades, audits, rumors. I'm protecting my family, Ethan replied evenly. His grandfather studied him. Be careful who you include in that definition. The warning was clear. When Ethan returned, his resolve was stronger than ever. He shared the conversation with Ayesha, who listened without interruption. He knows, she said when Ethan finished. Or at least suspects. Let him, Ethan replied. He won't stop me. That afternoon, preparations began in earnest. Lawyers drafted statements. Journalists were discreetly contacted. A controlled leak was planned, enough to spark attention, not enough to reveal their full hand. As the moment approached, Ayesha felt the familiar weight of fear return, heavier than before. She stood by the window, watching clouds gather again. What if they come after you? She asked without turning. Ethan joined her. They already have. What if this costs you everything? She whispered. He looked at her. Some things are worth more than everything. She turned to face him, emotion flooding her eyes. I never meant to become this important to you. He reached out, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. You didn't become important. You already were. The touch lingered, charged with unspoken emotion. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he leaned closer. She didn't pull away, but before the moment could deepen, his phone rang. Reality crashing back in. They've responded to the leak, Ethan said after reading the message. Public denial. Threats of lawsuits. Ayesha nodded. That means we struck a nerve. Yes, he agreed. And now comes the hardest part. That evening, as the first news stories began to circulate, the world outside the estate started to change. Names were mentioned. Questions were asked. The truth, once buried, was clawing its way to the surface. Ayesha sat beside Ethan, watching the screen, her hand resting near his. She felt a strange mix of terror and relief. No matter what happens next, she said, thank you for choosing me. He took her hand, holding it firmly. I didn't just choose you, he said. I chose us. Outside, thunder rolled again, echoing the storm they had unleashed. And as the night deepened, one thing became clear. The unwanted bride was no longer hiding. She was standing at the center of a battle that would change not only their lives, but the fate of everyone involved. The world outside the Blackwood estate erupted faster than either of them had anticipated. News outlets picked up the story within hours, each headline sharper than the last, each analyst speculating about corruption within one of the most powerful corporate families in the country. The carefully controlled leak had done its job. Attention was now locked onto the truth, and the people who had tried to bury it were scrambling. Inside the estate, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Lawyers paced, phones rang endlessly, and screens displayed breaking updates from multiple networks. Ethan moved through the chaos with calm authority, issuing instructions, countering false claims, and making sure every step followed the strategy they had set in place. Ayesha stayed close, offering insights, clarifying details, and watching the world finally see what she had risked everything to protect. They're trying to shift the narrative, she said, pointing to a headline blaming a rogue employee. That won't hold. It won't, Ethan agreed. Not with what we're releasing next. As the second wave of evidence went public, the tone changed. Denials weakened. Questions sharpened. Regulators announced formal investigations. The walls that had once seemed impenetrable began to crack. But pressure came from every direction. Ethan's grandfather called again, this time not with warnings, but with anger barely contained. You were destroying generations of work, he said over the line. For a woman you barely know. Ethan's voice was steady. I know exactly who she is. And I won't destroy my integrity to protect corruption. The call ended without reconciliation. When Ethan returned to the main room, Ayesha saw the strain in his eyes. I'm sorry, she said quietly. This is costing you your family. He shook his head. I'm losing illusions, not family. That night, security was tightened further. Threats flooded in, legal, financial, anonymous. Ayesha felt the old fear creeping back, sharper now because she knew exactly how dangerous these people could be. Later, as the estate finally grew quiet, she found Ethan alone in the library, staring at nothing. You should rest, she said. So should you, he replied with a faint smile. She sat across from him. Do you ever wish you had walked away when you had the chance? He considered the question. No, he said. But I do worry about what this is doing to you. She met his gaze. For the first time in years, I don't feel powerless. Something shifted in his expression, admiration, respect, something deeper. The next morning brought both victory and danger. A key executive implicated in the scandal was taken into custody. Markets reacted violently, shares fell, panic spread, and with panic came recklessness. A security alert sounded mid-afternoon. An unknown vehicle attempted to breach the outer perimeter before being forced back. No one was hurt, but the message was unmistakable. They're angry, Ayesha said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through her. And they're scared. That makes them unpredictable, Ethan replied. That evening, they sat together, reviewing the final set of documents, the last, undeniable proof. Releasing it would end the fight publicly. Privately, it would paint a target on their backs. If we do this, Ayesha said, there's no turning back. Ethan nodded. This ends tonight. She took a deep breath. Then let's finish it. As the files went live, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Major networks interrupted programming. Officials announced emergency hearings. The story dominated every platform. The truth was no longer something that could be silenced. Ayesha felt tears well in her eyes, not from fear, but from release. Years of carrying this burden alone dissolved in a single, irreversible moment. Ethan watched her closely. It's over, he said softly. She shook her head. The fight is over. The consequences are just beginning. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Investigations expanded. Arrests followed. The empire that had once threatened to crush her was now collapsing under its own weight. Later that night, as the estate finally settled into an uneasy calm, Ethan and Ayesha stood together on the balcony. The city lights stretched endlessly below them. You could leave now, Ethan said. Disappear. Start over somewhere safe. She turned to him. And leave you to deal with the fallout alone. He smiled faintly. I wouldn't blame you. She stepped closer. I'm not running anymore. The honesty in her voice made his breath catch. There's something you should know, she continued. When I agreed to this marriage, I thought I was sacrificing my future. I never imagined I'd find this. Neither did I, he admitted. Silence wrapped around them, thick with unspoken emotion. Slowly, carefully, Ethan reached for her hand. This time, there was no hesitation. She intertwined her fingers with his, grounding herself in the warmth. This started as a lie, she said. But it doesn't feel like one anymore. It isn't, he replied. Not now. For a moment, the world faded, leaving only the truth they had built together, through fear, courage, and choice. But just as peace seemed possible, Ethan's phone buzzed once more. He glanced at the message, his expression shifting. What is it? Ayesha asked. An arrest warrant, he said. For someone very close to me. Her heart sank. Your grandfather. He nodded. The investigation uncovered his role. It's going to be public by morning. The final blow. Ayesha squeezed his hand. You did the right thing. I know, he said. But knowing doesn't make it easier. They stood together as the night deepened, aware that dawn would bring irreversible change. The truth had bound them together. And now, it would demand its final price. The first light of dawn cut through the Blackwood estate like a knife, spilling across the polished floors and casting long shadows through the halls. Ethan stood silently in the study, the weight of the previous night pressing down on him. The arrest warrant against his grandfather had gone public. The empire was crumbling, every calculated move of power unraveling under the scrutiny of regulators, the press, and the law. Yet as devastating as it was, Ethan felt a strange sense of clarity. A long overdue reckoning had begun. Ayesha joined him quietly, her presence calm yet commanding. She had been by his side throughout the storm, a partner not in name only, but in action. Together, they had navigated threats from unknown assailants, betrayal from within, and the immense burden of truth. Now, standing together at the precipice of victory and chaos, she felt an unfamiliar but welcome strength, one that came from finally taking control of her own fate. They're going to push back, she said softly, her eyes on the flashing news updates that filled the screens. Family, colleagues, even some board members. They'll try to take this from us. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. They'll try. But we're ready. For hours, they worked side by side, responding to inquiries, coordinating with investigators, and ensuring that the truth could not be twisted. Ethan moved with the confidence of a man reclaiming his life and legacy, while Ayesha's insight and courage guided their strategy. They spoke little, letting actions speak where words would falter. And through it all, a quiet bond had formed, something neither had anticipated when their marriage had begun under duress. By afternoon, the dust of chaos settled just enough to allow a rare moment of reflection. Ethan led Ayesha to the balcony overlooking the sprawling city below. The wind tugged gently at her hair, carrying the scent of rain and possibility. It's done, he said, though even he knew the word was temporary. Battles would continue, reputations would be challenged, but the truth now had its place in the world. Ayesha turned to him, studying the hard lines of his face softened by relief and exhaustion. It doesn't feel real, she admitted. All of it, the danger, the lies, the fear, and now, this. Ethan reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. It's real, he said. And it's ours. The closeness of their hands sparked a warmth neither could ignore. For months, they had stood side by side in the shadows, fighting together, yet a line of distance had always existed between them. Now, standing here in the light, that distance evaporated, leaving only what had quietly grown between them, trust, respect, and something far more intimate. She stepped closer, her head tilting slightly as if testing the waters of this new reality. Ethan, she began, hesitating, do you ever think about what this, could be beyond all of this? He met her gaze, dark eyes reflecting a depth of emotion he had rarely allowed himself to feel. I have, he admitted. But I was afraid it was just obligation at first. Now, I know it's not. I care about you. The words hung in the air, heavier than any threat, more powerful than any secret. Ayesha's heart raced. She had feared being unwanted, being used, being silenced, but now she was seen, fully and without pretense. Her lips curved into a small, genuine smile. I care about you too, she said softly. For a moment, the city, the chaos, the threats, all of it, faded into insignificance. They stood together, bound not by circumstance, but by choice. Their hands remained intertwined, and slowly, deliberately, Ethan leaned forward. She met him halfway, and their lips touched in a quiet, tentative kiss, a kiss that carried months of tension, fear, gratitude, and unspoken longing. It was not fiery or urgent, it was grounding, a promise in the midst of uncertainty. When they pulled back, foreheads resting together, both of them laughed softly, relief and wonder in the same breath. This is, Ayesha began, but words failed her. Yes, Ethan said, completing her thought with a quiet certainty. This is real. For the first time since the wedding, the label of unwanted bride felt irrelevant. The forced union that had begun in obligation had transformed into a genuine partnership, one rooted in respect, shared struggle, and a connection neither could deny. The days that followed brought their own challenges. Investigations continued, media scrutiny intensified, and the remnants of the Blackwood empire adjusted to the new reality. But through it all, Ethan and Ayesha moved as a team, protective of each other, strategizing together, and finding strength in shared purpose. Threats that once would have broken them now seemed manageable because they faced them united. One evening, as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ayesha sat beside Ethan in the study. The tension that had haunted the last months had finally begun to lift, replaced with quiet contentment. She leaned her head on his shoulder, allowing herself a rare moment of peace. You know, she said softly, I never imagined life could feel like this. Safe. Together. Real. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. Neither did I. But sometimes, the hardest paths lead to the best destinations. She looked up at him, eyes reflecting the fading light. Do you think we'll ever have a normal life? Ethan smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Normal. Maybe. But I think we'll have something better, a life we choose together, free from secrets and fear. For the first time, Ayesha truly believed it. All the uncertainty, all the danger, all the pain had led to this moment. She wasn't just a survivor or a bride forced into a union, she was a partner, an equal, and most importantly, she was seen and valued. As night fell over the estate, Ethan and Ayesha stood on the balcony once more, looking out at the city that stretched endlessly before them. The storm had passed, leaving a calm that felt almost surreal after months of chaos. Their fingers remained intertwined, hearts beating in unison, a quiet understanding passing between them. This is the start, Ethan said. The start of everything we've waited for. Ayesha smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. Then let's make it count. And as the city lights flickered below, casting reflections across their faces, they stood together, no longer unwanted, no longer bound by fear, and no longer living in shadows. The bride and the man who had once rejected her now faced the world side by side, bound by truth, trust, and the undeniable force of love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. For Ethan and Ayesha, the nightmare had ended. The secret that had threatened to destroy them had instead brought them together, forging a bond stronger than any fear, stronger than any family expectation. The Blackwood empire may have shifted, lives may have been upended, but they had emerged not just unbroken, but united. And as they watched the night settle over the city, they both knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Forever.